So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is the Alaska Biophysical Settings Review Tundra work session. We really appreciate your time and interest in being here with us today. Thank you. I see some people that are introducing themselves along with their favorite dessert in the chat. So I'll introduce myself first and a couple of the Landfire team members that are here joining us, and then we're going to just try and jump right in and get to work. I'm Kori Blankenship, and I'm a fire ecologist based in Bend, Oregon. Years ago, around 2008, I worked in Alaska creating the biophysical settings models that we're now trying to review and update. I'm joined here today by some colleagues. Jim Smith is my supervisor. He's based in Jacksonville, Florida, and Randy Swaty, a forest ecologist based in Marquette, Michigan. Megan Dettenmeyer is also working with us in communications, and she's here to solve any technical problems we have. Let's see, and we have Ingela Puma, who's the technical lead for Landfire in New Jersey, and so she is well-versed in Landfire mapping methods, but she also has experience in Alaska. So that's our Landfire team here today. I'm going to jump in with just a small bit of background. There are definitely folks on the call who have a deep history with this program and with the models. And then to my knowledge, some of the folks I'm seeing here today are maybe newer. And so I want to give just a really quick introduction to what the biophysical settings models are so that we have just a little bit of basic background information. And then we'll jump right in to the discussion. The discussion, you can participate, I think, even if you don't know technical details of the Landfire models or mapping. So please don't be concerned if some of the technical stuff, if you don't know it, you've never seen it before, don't worry. We're just going to be, having a discussion that I think everybody will be able to participate in. So I'm seeing a couple new folks join, so I'm just going to give a shout out, say good morning, and let you know that in lieu of introductions, we're having everyone put their name and title and favorite dessert in the chat as a little way to get to know each other. Okay, so I just have a couple of little PowerPoint slides that I will share as background information to get us started. So share. Here we go. Actually, I'm going to share screen. Okay. Also, I'll mention again that we are recording this session. All right. So to get started, I wanted to review what a biophysical setting is, because it's not necessarily standard terminology outside of the Landfire program. You can see our definition here. The idea is that we're looking at potential vegetation that may have existed on the landscape. You'll see here that our definition includes prior to Euro-American settlement and in the current biophysical environment. And also we're looking at the impact of historical disturbance regimes. So, down here in Bend, this idea of Euro-American settlement makes a lot of sense to people. I don't know how well it applies in Alaska, but what I will say is that what we're talking about here are, ecosystems with their natural kind of quote unquote natural disturbance regime. So prior to fire suppression, we're looking at the conditions that systems evolved with. That's the idea with the biophysical settings concept. And then a biophysical setting model really includes two things, a description and a model. And this is a picture of part of a description here. And so you can see that the description is fairly comprehensive, looking at where the type occurs, the biophysical site conditions, a whole list of species, and lots of information about the disturbance regime. There are other parts, but this is a lot of the foundation of a biophysical settings description. And then we create a quantitative state and transition model to go with that. And if you've never done state and transition modeling before, the idea, I think, is fairly straightforward. This is an example from a beach ridge in Southeast Alaska. And Michael Shepard has done some work down there where he defined an early ecotone stage, followed by young forest, and then more middle-aged and old forests. And so in our landfire model, we followed the example that from Shepard's work, and we defined our classes. We use a little different terminology, but the idea is the same. We've got an early state representing that early ecotone, a mid state representing the young forest, and a late state representing the middle-aged and old forest. Oops, there it goes. Okay. And the models are quantitative. So each state within this beach ridge community has an age range associated with it. And then there are pathways for growth and pathways for disturbance. And there's also a probability associated with every disturbance so that you can run these models out over time and look at how often disturbance occurs and how much of the landscape would be occupied by these various states. Which is part of why Landfire creates these quantitative models. So a couple of reasons why the models are important. One is we use those descriptions to help map biophysical settings. Oops. And then another is we take our estimate of fire frequency and severity from the biophysical settings models, and we use that to map fire frequency and severity across the state. Now, this is our old map. And by updating the models over the next few months, we'll be able to update this map, hopefully with new and better information than we've had in the past. All right. So I'll stop sharing there for a minute. That's my quick background on biophysical settings models. Now, getting back to today's goals, I want to first see if there are any general questions, and also provide an opportunity for anyone who is maybe not comfortable jumping into the Tundra discussion. If there's anyone who wants just a really basic introduction to biophysical settings and the review process, we can use a breakout room, and Randy has volunteered to lead that breakout room and help anyone who wants more background information, has other questions that they would like answered, and they're not comfortable bringing the whole group. So you can raise a hand or put up some kind of emoji if you'd like to be in a breakout room with Randy. You can come back at any time, so it's your choice. So that's one option. And then I'll just open up the floor and stop talking here for a second to see if there are any general questions before we start looking at the tundra ecosystems on our agenda today.
I just have a general question. This is Inga. What's the process just in terms of this group, right? So does your outreach go beyond this group as well, or how does that work?
Yeah, we are trying to include anybody who think has the knowledge to help and anybody who wants to be included. We're casting as broad a net as we can to engage experts with ecological knowledge of these communities. And so that could be people with backgrounds, maybe in plant biology that know the species really well. It could be fire ecologists or people that study other disturbance regimes. So anybody with the ecological background to help build these descriptions and build the models, we would welcome participation. This group in particular is somewhat self-selected. We welcomed anybody. We had a general call for people who were interested in specifically working on tundra ecosystems. And then we also have sessions coming up on, I think we've got boreal forests, maybe Southeast Alaska. We have a few more sessions where people can opt in if they're really interested in those communities and try to help us answer some broader picture questions that we have about the ecology of these systems.
Okay, thank you.
Any other general questions?
This is Jennifer Barnes. I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of your introduction because I was with a new computer trying to install Zoom. But if we have not gone through the first session that you guys already put out, and will we be of use today? I mean, I've been working with or understanding BPSs since they came about, but I guess
Yes.
I don't want to waste time with you guys or not waste your time with me being on here if I haven't gone through some of the sessions.
Yeah, so thanks, Jennifer. And yes, I think we could absolutely use your input. So the idea here is that you really don't need to know the models or the descriptions. I'm going to try to lead a discussion that talks about tundra types and some bigger picture questions we have. And I don't think you need to know any technical modeling stuff to participate. In fact, I don't even anticipate that we'll get into the modeling software. So the idea is that we'll be discussing some differences in tundra types and then also the different disturbance regimes that influence tundra disturbance types.
All right, great.
Does that make sense?
Yep, yeah, it does.
Okay, and I know you've been involved before. I gave a whirlwind overview just to make sure everybody knew what a biophysical settings model was and a description. But I didn't go super in depth just because we have such limited time. This is a new thing, these work sessions, they're new, we're trying them out and we'll see how it goes already. I was wondering this morning if I should have slotted in a 2-hour time window, but we'll see how far we get with 1 hour and you guys can give me feedback.
Thank you.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yeah.
So I haven't been involved with Landfire Review prior to this, but I have like a general understanding of the concept. And maybe you're planning on doing this, but I think it would be really helpful if we could start off with if you wouldn't mind explaining how you're defining Arctic, subarctic, and tundra for that matter.
Right. Okay. So the concepts that we'll be looking at are what are called ecological systems. Ecological systems is a mid-scale classification that covers the whole state. And to my knowledge, there's not a hard and fast definition of each region, although I could be wrong about that, but and in fact, sometimes like when we look at the list of types, or if you got my email, those of you who got my email, you saw the list of types, there will be Arctic and subarctic will be lumped together for some of the types. If they have a similar species composition and similar disturbance regime, they'll say, subarctic and Arctic tundra, for example. And it's not super hard and fast, but it is defined in the description that NatureServe puts out and that we follow very closely in our biophysical settings for defining what these types are. And so, when we look at an individual type, we can bring up its description so that we're all on the same page about, what is the community we're talking about? What are the species? What's the geography? And I do have an ArcMap project up where we can look at where a landfire has previously mapped it. And that might help to a certain extent if it was mapped well. And if it wasn't mapped well, then you can give me feedback on that. So Lindsay, that's not feel like that's a little unsatisfactory. Like I'd like to be more definitive, but we're talking about kind of a broad range of types and they each have their own description and species list. So is that enough for now to get started, or is there something more that I can provide?
We can talk about it as we go along. If there's just a ongoing discussion of what constitutes subarctic in this state. So I'd be curious how you're treating Western Alaska. And just in reading through the first description, it seems like there are some splits that you're proposing between the Seward Peninsula and the Arctic coastal plain. So perhaps there's a, for example, a subarctic Arctic split merited there.
Right.
And because you're translating this to a map product, it seems like there should be some fast rules for defining those ecoregions.
Right.
In my mind.
Yes. And that is something I want to get at today to the extent possible. So I think that'll come up in the discussion.
Okay, great.
All right. Any other general questions? I don't see that anyone has raised a hand or put up any emojis. So
I'm trying to find, I just went from Teams to this, so I'm looking for my hand on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Just regarding the map thing, I'm looking at your folder with the drafts, and aren't all those little numbers afterwards the Landfire map units, which does provide some different geographic context? The
Yes.
67, 68, 69.
So yes and no. Originally in about 2008, we created a map and a set of models for Alaska. And then in the last few years, NatureServe revamped the classification for Alaska. And so I have kind of created a map that crosswalks the old systems into the new systems. And so I have like a best guess of where this new classification gets mapped out. But it's not perfect, but I think it's a good approximation for us to start with. And we're looking at, in some cases, kind of new groupings of biophysical settings. And those will then, after we model and describe them, the Landfire team will hopefully be creating a new map of biophysical settings with a slightly different legend than we used previously.
Okay, thank you.
Which is one of the reasons that it's so important to do this review now, so that if there are any problems with that classification, we get those hashed out. Okay. Let me jump back real quick. This is the list of types. And based on that kind of crosswalk that I did using our old biophysical settings map, I estimated the area that each of these systems occupied in the state. I try, to focus, at least initially, on the most widespread systems so that, we're kind of getting the most bang for our buck in terms of getting things right across a broad geography. And we'll try to focus on the bigger systems first, or the more widespread systems. But of course, we're taking input and review on every type that's listed here. So my first question was, when I looked at this full group of tundra ecosystems, a few had fire as a disturbance, and you can see the modeled all fire return interval. So this is our best estimate at the mean fire return interval for each biophysical setting. But about half of them didn't include fire as a disturbance. And I'm curious if anybody thinks fire should be included in these other types. So I'll open that up for discussion. I'm imagining maybe, are there some that we could say are too wet to burn or too sparse to burn?
It would be easier to answer that if we saw it on a map, but I would think the polygonal ground. So you're saying the lower ones?
Yeah.
The ground shrub tussock tundra, the Arctic polygonal ground shrub tussock tundra, 17080, definitely.
7080. Yeah. Let me bring that. I can bring that up. So, because I have an ARC map going. 7080 North American Arctic. I'm going to copy it from my whole list and bring it out. I don't have all of them. 7080.
At the very top, right there.
This one?
Yeah, no, the one.
Oh yeah, that's why I was like, it's not the shrub tussock. Okay, I think I got it. So this one.
No, that wasn't the one, but that's another one.
Yeah.
That one definitely, yes, fire.
Were you talking about the polygonal ground shrub tussock?
Yes.
Yeah.
But this one you just pulled up is also.
Polygonal ground. Oh, I don't have that one pulled up, but let me bring that one up real quick. So we'll put on this one as well.
It's the blue, the third one down.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Nope, not that one.
Yeah. I'm trying to delete the others.
Okay.
To like single it out. So we want the top one?
Yeah.
Blue one? Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm showing, you can kind of see in my legend here. Ooh, that one's not, it's hard to see because it's not very widespread, but let me zoom into it.
Anything that is in that 68 is likely to have fire in a tundra, except unless it's like barren. Okay.
So that was kind of one of my questions, was that we have some other information. For example, this study, it's a little bit old, by Gabriel and Chandy, 1983, and they found more lightning fire, more area burned on the Seward Peninsula, but very little elsewhere. So I was kind of wondering, is it a distinction by type, or do we just say tundra found on the Seward Peninsula needs to have...
This is a super old study. That's very outdated for what's actually occurring in tundra.
So, go ahead.
Well, and that whole, and Eric, you can speak to this too. The Arctic foothills, but the Arctic mountains, the Western Alaska, all of those have fire, but definitely beyond the Seward Peninsula. This was produced in 77 was a huge tundra fire year, but there's so many more fires there. Really what you should do is overlay the fire history and you'll see where all the fires go.
So go ahead, Eric.
I was going to comment that in Alaska, I guess, in graduate school, I had this soils professor and he was digging soils pits, and there's charcoal everywhere unless it's like in the mountains and the rock is prohibiting things from going. The fire return intervals on some of these tundra things can be, longer than our lifetime and not well characterized on the North Slope, like maybe in the thousands of years, but they all have fire disturbance.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want, there's been a lot of recent work done in Yukon Delta area, and so there is lichen tundra that burns there and has a fire history in it. So I'm not sure where you have that mapped, similar to Jennifer's question, versus that subarctic dwarf shrub one. So I'd like to see where the Arctic lichen tundra is, and if you have that mapped on the...
Yeah, that was another one.
Yeah.
Just some rules of engagement. So, I had my hand up, and are we going by hands, or should we just jump in?
I
came in a little late.
Great question. I didn't really set any rules of engagement, and when I'm sharing my screen, it's not actually easy for me to see. But now that you mention it, I've brought up my participant list on the right, so hopefully I can see, and maybe Randy could help me with that as well. So why don't we start with hands? But if you jump in, that's fine too. If you're not interrupting anyone, if that sounds reasonable.
Sure.
Yeah, I have Eric with a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I have some comments on that, the North Slope, that 67 we're seeing on the screen. But if you could go back to the previous slide, that there have been basically no fires in the Arctic coastal plain. So, for there to calculate, there really isn't a fire return interval because you need at least 2 fires in succession to have an interval. But there have been some very, very small fires in the Arctic coastal plain, mostly in the last 5 or 10 years. But I would say that anything in that Arctic coastal plain, is the fire return interval is going to be very long. And even in the Arctic foothills, the only known reburns have occurred in the last 5 years or so. So again, this fire return interval, you have to have 2 fires in succession to get an interval. So, I would sort of mathematically speaking, I guess anywhere in that 67 is going to have a very, very long fire return interval. Some of those pixels that you showed in the ArcGIS there, it looked like they did show up in the Arctic coastal plain, but most of them were over in the Seward Peninsula, but the fire regimes there are very, very different.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm trying to get my participants.
Okay, I have a hand up from Jennifer Barnes. Hi, Jennifer.
All right. The values that they have on those, they're more fire cycles than fire return interval. Is, I guess, the percent of each province burned, and this has always needed to be redone. There's some more recent papers on it.
So we got this comment came as part of an FEIS review, and they were I think it was published in 2015. So this information from the Fire Effects Information System. They did a comprehensive review of the fire effects literature for tundra in Alaska, and they made that was one of the pieces of evidence that they pointed to, was this old article from Gabriel and Tandy, but also they said that the newer literature was pointing to higher frequencies on the Seward Peninsula and the Noatak River, more frequent fire in those areas, and then a lot less frequent fire to the north, and maybe even to the south, which I think, sorry, I'm not very good with names. The gentleman that was just sharing, it wasn't Eric. It was, at least I don't think it was Eric. But I think that jives with what one of the other participants just said about less fire in the Arctic coastal plain and the Arctic foothills.
Yeah, that was Eric.
Oh, that was Eric. Okay, yeah, thank you. So they were that study, the literature review from FEIS was looking at everything that they could find in the literature, including much more recent stuff. I guess maybe we could jump back to the original question before we kind of get into the geographic split, although it sounds like it's a little bit related. But my initial question was, should any of these types that we don't have fire model for, should they include fire? And I think what I'm hearing is, yes, they should include fire if they're occurring in zone 68.
Where was the Alaska Arctic Lake and Tundra one?
Oh, let's look at that. Thank you.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
And Jennifer has her hands up.
Okay. So this map here includes the lake and tundra, and I can go to ArcMap if needed. But we split this is the dwarf shrub lake and tundra. Is that the one you wanted?
No, there was one that just said Arctic tundra without the shrub in there, I believe.
Okay, thank you. So next time I'll make these individual layers ahead of time. There's permafrost plateau, here we go. Alaska, top pink and tundra. Okay. So that one, let me zoom out just a little bit. It's hard to see, but it's occurring in these areas.
Yeah, so 72, depending on where that is, could have, like Jennifer had said, pulling up the fire history maps would help, but there was a bunch of fires in 2015 within lake and tundra that was about 50 miles northwest of Bethel. And then they had done some coring, and there was a fire history there. I can send you some references on that.
Okay, awesome.
Can Randy Swaty here? I'm going to ask probably a really dumb question. I'm in Michigan, never been to Alaska, so tons to learn. When you guys talk about fire regimes, I'm hearing everything from relatively current going back to charcoal records. And I know in Alaska, it could be that you're looking to current to help understand historic. But I know there's also a major climate change front in Alaska. Could you guys clarify for me the relationships between current fire and historical, just so I have it straight in my head, because I know it's different in different places. And if that's a long PhD, you can tell me another time.
This is Tom. I had my hand raised to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Thanks, Tom.
We have an awesome fire history data set. It's really good into the 90s. It's pretty good into the 80s. And into the 40s, they've added a lot of polygons from looking at data. But I tried to get some big fires on the North Slope into the data set from a 2013 paper, and they're from last century in the 1900s, and they're big, but they're not in the data set. I worked on some EIS stuff. I was a fire guy on the North Slope, and I do think that stuff, in Anwar, and it's coastal and it's wet, there's a lot of water in it, and it's really hard for it to burn, but it's grass, and so it does burn. The thing with the North Slope is it's frozen for a very long time, and then the coastal influence means that when it isn't frozen, a lot of times the weather is too damp for fires to spread if lightning ignites them. And we've been terrible at reporting them. Like in 2012, I was responsible for a big chunk of ground there, and I'd send somebody up to fly a fire. They would have to spend the night in Barrow and come back as a 2-day mission. And so they wouldn't go and fly it again. They flew it when it was smoking. But in the last 5 years, I think that the GIS people have been looking at satellite imagery and starting to capture the smaller fires. So the North Slope charcoal is the way to look at it, and the fire return intervals are very long, but we don't know as much about exactly how long they are. And that stuff in the Western Alaska, we know a lot more about it because we've had people running around there more, and we've been collecting data better. But the numbers, climate change seems to be causing more fires and more fire history, but also our reporting keeps getting better. And so those are two major reasons why the numbers keep changing. But the lakes, people talk about the lake data too. So in places where the intervals are really long, that's what we have.
Thanks.
Although the last thing is it's grass, and so it takes it like an hour to dry out, and it can burn right across the water in those tundra tussocks. So the vegetation, it's the weather, not the vegetation, that makes a place not burn.
Okay.
yeah, just to follow up on what Tom said, there's been recent kind of advances thanks to remote sensing and ground penetrating radar and other things, helping to correlate with some of the coring data and the lake coring data, because obviously there's no fire scars, no trees in the tundra to do those traditional methods. So yeah, the Gabriel and Tandy papers put that in a little bit of perspective. It is old. There's been more stuff since then. And talking with Jerry Tandy, I know, and some, not in this particular area weren't discussing, but one of his other ones, he didn't like what had been presented in that paper. Gabriel kind of put that in. I'm not sure who Gabriel was, but I know Jerry didn't necessarily agree with some of the results of that. So I guess I'd be real cautious about using that, especially given the new data.
Yes, absolutely. Point well taken. And there are quite a few new studies. That was just I thought it was a nice visual graphic. So hopefully it stimulated good conversation, if nothing else. Looks like Stephen.
Yes, you see a hand from Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Good to see you again.
Hey, Randy. Hey, Kori. Good to see you guys.
Likewise.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So while we're talking about the fire regimes, and I am not educated on a lot of the background information that we're talking about. I'm coming more on as a environmental observer, and one thing I've noticed is growing up is that the fire frequency really seemed to, in the South Central area, it was always focused on the Beetle Kill areas. And I was wondering if, since that's really changed a lot since pre-Euro-American days and impacts on the land, I was wondering if that maybe has a big deal with changing the frequency and really kind of changing the BSP that we're trying to understand. I mean, if we're not taking consideration a large volume of standing deadwood.
Yeah, thanks.
Tundra.
Lisa, did you have some ideas on that?
Well, I was just going to say, that might be a discussion for the boreal area, but in tundra, there's encroachment of shrubs and things on tundra, but I don't think there's much white spruce to where we're considering that right now.
In the village that I'm working on for soil nutrient management plan, they're kind of right there in between the boreal and tundra transition point. And so they do have white spruce coming in specific areas where they're having disturbances to actually allow for the plants to establish. And then that's starting to bring in spruce beak bartles also, spruce bark beetles also. So it's kind of changing the scenario in this specific village. In Southwest Alaska. It's Akiachek, if anyone's wondering.
This is Jennifer. That makes sense. There's also Beetle Kill up on the Seward Peninsula, which is very odd to me that it's up there, but it probably has, I would say, except in those areas in the Southwest, that probably would have a little more influence to it as a disturbance. But if we're looking at the Tundra BpSs, I mean, I'm not sure whether you're actually would convert any of these white spruce stands into a tundra type. It's unlikely that any of the tundra types would have, they won't, unless it's mapped wrong, they probably would not have any beetle kill in it.
So I see Inga, Jennifer, and Eric, it looks like, have hands up. So yeah, Inga, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. I was just wondering if I could share the screen of the fire history, because I feel like that would be really helpful.
If you can, go for it. Do you have a share screen option, hopefully?
All right, let's see if that works. Does that
looks like it? Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, so because we were all, Jennifer and I both posted that link in there, but you still have to kind of manipulate it a little bit to actually see the fire history. Yeah. And so, obviously there's a lot of browns for the more recent fires. But, I guess my question is, given the folks that are familiar with the charcoal history stuff, is this representative at all of before fire suppression, or is it kind of out? It's still too modern for us to base it on, or because you were saying there was they were starting to pick up more fires on the North Slope there with some of the more advanced fire detection that we have now. But, based on the charcoal, it sounds like there was stuff there anyways before.
So this is Jennifer, if I can answer that, since we did the study on the charcoal work in the Noatak Valley, and then our collaborators did the work up in the North Slope and also on the Seward. That the data that's basically from that is showing that there's fire history that goes back, particularly in Noatak and also the Seward Peninsula for thousands of years back. And that charcoal data basically goes back to, that study in particular was just back to 6,000 years. And I think they've expanded up on the North Slope. In some of the charcoal studies, they did not detect, in the originals, they didn't detect much. And they were saying, oh, it's really long. But the work like that Eric Miller and Tom referred to, if you start looking at the satellite imagery and going back to Landsat imagery from like the 70s, you can see these scars in there. And so we're picking up more. It still is probably infrequent, but it's hard to say from, and I haven't read any, and Eric, you may know more, but you may know more about whether, 10,000 years ago, whether there was fires up on the North Slope. I would say probably still a little less frequent. The Seward Peninsula, they've had their charcoal data is showing that there's been fires down there for thousands of years. Our fire suppression has been pretty limited in terms of what's actually been suppressed in these tundra areas. Most of our fire suppression started in the late 40s when you have roadless areas. If you think about aircraft and trying to respond to fires, I doubt that our fire suppression has really done much to change the fire regime. I think climate change has increased the occurrence of fire and our detection. So,
yeah, that's really informative, I think. Do you want me to stop sharing?
Sure, but thank you for bringing that up. And I got the link. I saw Jennifer put it in. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
And Eric, yeah, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. Just on the North Slope, it's the palynological records, the lake sediment records that Feng Sheng Hu did in 2 lakes there showed the last charcoal peak was something like 6,000 years ago. So, I don't think we want to go that far back for our biophysical settings, because I don't think the same, ecosystem was there 6,000 years ago. But, having said that, there are Ben Jones at UAF, and I think Tom mentioned this, found 2 very large fires, Anaktuvik River-sized fires, approximately 1880 to 1920. And he found those by all the fire effects that they left behind, the thermokarst and the shrubification and all that. So on the North Slope, we can say that fire is extremely episodic there, is that when there is a large fire season, you can get large acreages burned, but it's got to be super episodic. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there, our fire record, I think the first fire that shows up on the North Slope is 1969 or something. So our sort of historical record doesn't go back very far.
Right.
But, you can go back and look in the Landsat and you can find a few small fires here and there, but, and they are getting larger as the years pass. 1977, they thought a big fire was 4,000 acres. And then 1993, there was a 90,000 acre fire. And then 2007, there was the Anaktuvik River fire, 256,000 acres. And so, is there a pattern? There probably is. But as far as the biophysical setting, I think it's the most confident thing we can say is that, it was very episodic. There's the potential for large fires, but they weren't occurring super frequent. Thanks. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks for that. Okay, this is really interesting. I'm going to go on to a related question, maybe for about 5 more minutes before we wrap up. I'm happy to stay on, but respecting that other people may need to get going. So my related question is just for the types that we have modeled fire in, do we have the right relative fire frequency? And maybe it's easier to look at this in a table. Actually, it would be this table. So modeled fire frequency in just 4 types. And I'm wondering if sort of the relative fire frequency seems about right to you, or if you would suggest adjustments. So we're showing the Arctic and Subarctic tussock tundra burning the most frequently, but really about the same as the shrub tussock tundra. And then we have, for the dwarf shrub lichen tundra, we have a frequent fire model burning at about every 250 years and an infrequent fire model burning at closer to 1,000 years.
So Lisa has her hand up. Hi, Lisa.
I have a question. And again, I missed like the first few moments. Are these mapped? Is this the new 2016
So
map,
there is
fire map, or is it the old one? I'm not sure how much difference it'll make in the tundras.
Yeah, it's the old one because we haven't redone it. We have not updated the map. But when we do update the map, these are the classes that will be mapped unless we make changes to them here. Like if you say, you don't need to have these 2 types split out, you can map and model them together, then we would follow the advice that we get.
Okay, so it's not the 2016 EVT / ecological systems that they just came up. Okay. Okay, so
just a quick clarification there too. The data Kori is showing would be the biophysical settings data, not the EVT, just to be clear.
Okay.
Some places those might differ, and in some places they might not differ that much.
Yeah. So we have a few hands up: Lisa, Jennifer, Eric, Thomas. Maybe Thomas, I'll give you the floor and work backwards up the name list. I haven't heard from you in a bit.
Well, it's a pretty little picture of Alaska, but just in general, the colors look pretty good as far as where the more frequent fires happen. Eastern interior Alaska has the most frequency, and that brown color seems to be up on the north slope where we're talking about really long return intervals. That's all.
Okay, great. Eric, I have you next.
Yeah, just more of a question for the group. I think we're looking at kind of shrubs, tussock and lichen. And, in my mind, wherever there's tussock, you're going to probably have more frequent fire because it's just got all that dead fuel, the dead tussock, the foliage skirts that carry fire. But then again, lichens dry out very quickly and burn as well, but probably isn't all that much of it. But, and I would think shrubs would probably be the least likely to carry fire. But I guess I was just wondering what other people might think.
Thanks for that, Eric. That sounds like, based on that, the relative fire frequency where we did put fire might be about right. We've got where tussocks are present, it's burning more frequently, and lichen.
Yeah, again, I would think any of the brown up in zone 67 is probably got to be a lot longer fire interval than 175 years. So that North American Arctic and Subarctic tussock tundra on the very bottom there, anything in 67, I think would need to be a longer fire return interval.
Yeah, so that raises the question of what we would call a model split. And you can see an example of that with the dwarf shrub lichen tundra, where we have areas that burn infrequently and areas that burn frequently. And so we can do the same thing with this tussock tundra and split it out so that areas in zone 68 and along the Seward Peninsula have a model where fire is more frequent, and then an area where it burns less frequently.
Is that just Arctic versus subarctic? Maybe? Like split it out by name.
Let me bring that one up.
So before you leave this...
do you want me to come back to the spreadsheet?
Well, I think these mean fire return intervals that you have on there, I think 990 is probably way too long, depending on where it's mapped.
Yep.
And I think that the tussock tundra is probably shorter than 175. If you are sticking to things being in that, 68 and 67 having a different, I know when we were reviewing these a long time ago, that we basically were told we just have to treat it all together as one. But the 68 definitely has a more frequent fire return interval. I had suggested even 50 to 60, which probably is too short. That's my bias on the no attack, but probably closer to 100, 120. And I put in some papers that indicate that, and it looks like Lisa put in some other ones.
So just to clarify, you're saying with this Arctic and subarctic tussock tundra, the areas that burn more frequently might even be around 120 years?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we did last time. We wagged it and then they stuck. There's references out there, and there's data to support it. Even with our GIS data layers, our fire perimeters go back to 1940. And we've done a pretty concerted effort to try to get some of those new ones in the tundra areas added in. So I think you could actually get a better idea of fire return intervals by actually using the GIS data that's there for somebody.
Okay.
And then in terms of, I think, Eric, your thoughts on it being, as you get into the more real woody, shrubby, alder types of tundra, I think you probably see a little less. I mean, I've seen it on the ground. You see less fire going through those areas.
Yeah. Can I jump in? I don't see anybody's hand up here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Jen, I assume that Feng Sheng or Filiger or somebody, I can't remember who, Gagliotti, somebody has got to have done a fire return interval for no attack. I'm not familiar with that literature, but it seems like somebody should have some numbers.
We did, and that's what the paper that I put in there, that was the work that Feng Sheng and Phil Higuera, when we got the original lake coring work done in no attack. And theirs was more on a 6,000 year, was more on the 100, 120 fire return interval with lake coring. And then, but they said some of the sites were like 30 years. So if you average it across them, it'd probably be pretty low.
I think that one is in the FEIS list, but it sounds like you put a link to it too, Jennifer, so thank you.
Thomas,
are you referring to?
Oh,
sorry.
Well, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say these biophysical settings, they seem to be heavily tied towards vegetation, but really on the North Slope, it's just frozen a lot longer. And then around all these coastal areas, Western Alaska and the North Slope, the coastal weather really causes it to be that things are not available to burn most of the time. When high pressure comes in, pushes the clouds out, they're able to burn, but there's not a lot of people out there. So then there has to be like upper level ridge breakdown that causes lightning while it's dry. And then we have to like not get an amazing amount of rain right after that. And so that's what's really driving the fire. And to a smaller extent, the tussocks, when they burn, like Eric alluded to, that they're more flammable. They're not really more flammable than the lichens, or they are more flammable than the brush. The brush is like little umbrellas with their leaves, and that woody material takes longer to dry out. Grass and lichen take like 20 minutes to an hour to dry out in the sun, right? And so that the tussocks, so they can regenerate like in a year or two, like where we do prescribed burns in tussock tundra. Like people have debates of should we burn it every year or every other year, let the tussock regenerate itself, right? Those are the time frames. The lichens, some of the data say that they won't come back for like 35 or 70 or 100 years. And those lichens, they're like crackly paper when you're walking around on them and it's dry. They carry fire, and in some places they just coat the landscape and they're continuous. But they have different numbers, and one of the ecologists could talk more about it. But in some places they say they regenerate actually quite a bit faster than those really long numbers. So anyway, those are just some thoughts that might help. But largely it's the location relative to the coast, and then that far north stuff is just not thought out to where there's not ice over the top of it very long each year. That's explanatory factor.
Okay. Thank you. I see a few hands up. I want to do a quick wrap up because we're at the hour, but I will stay as long as people would like to stay. So for those of you who do need to go, thank you so much for being here. The biophysical settings are open for review for the whole state until the end of February. There's a lot of information about that online. You can always contact myself or Randy or any other member of our team to get more information. As I mentioned before, these work sessions are new. If you have feedback, I would love to hear it. We'll do a survey at the end, but because I've got 3 or 4 more of these coming up, if you have feedback on what we could do better next time, I would really appreciate it. And you can just contact me directly. And also, if you can, the way we're asking people to provide review, in addition to formats like this, where I can synthesize some of the information and make revisions, we're asking for individuals to please go into the Word documents. I sent you all the Word documents that describe the Tundra biophysical settings. If you can, turn on track changes and take 20 minutes to give us some feedback. So if you know about fire, you can cut to the disturbance section and give us feedback on fire. If you're really into plant species, you can look at our species list and provide feedback there. So please, if you do have time, edit those Word documents and you can send me feedback that way. So thanks again for those who are for those of you that were able to make it today, and I'll stick around as long as folks want to talk. Oh, Randy put in a note. We're happy to meet with you individually to get documents to review. So yes, we'll help in any way we can. Let's see, I think Lisa's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I was just, I had posted a couple of papers in there that were kind of specific to the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, but the second one by Lynn et al. Does include some comparisons to other studies that have been done in the North Slope, and they kind of have some, how many fires have occurred in these areas in the last 1,000 years. But one thing I want to point out is that in their study, there had been relatively close to where I had done field work and where they had done some quarrying. There had been another by Chipman, I think. They had done a lake and kind of lumped that in as being a super long fire return interval based on the charcoal evidence, while when the subsequent people who I posted in did a different lake, they came up with something that actually reflected what we had also seen. Yeah, I don't know how often those chlorine things relative to some of the things are picking up in the satellite imagery and then the subsidence data. Just, I guess, be a little careful. Where they do the chlorine in the lakes can make a difference. And at least in this instance, a previous study was pretty way off just because of the location of the lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of sometimes all you have to go from. But I think, it's an emerging, field. And some of these are just being published like in the last couple of years, really, where they're narrowing things down into the fire history.
Yeah. The other thing that's always a challenge is that a lot of the literature doesn't really talk about specific types, certainly not biophysical settings. Sometimes you can make a best guess based on the species composition, but sometimes they're more talking about a geography and its fire history. And so it's challenging to link that sometimes to biophysical settings. Or they'll just talk about that it'll be referred to as fire in tundra in general. And so then that makes it's challenging for us to apply that to an individual BPS. We don't, it's hard to know what that applies to. Lindsay.
Hey, I am curious how you are, if you're mandated to, or and if so, how you plan to tie this into the NVC. I think Lisa, actually, maybe you had mentioned that the Landfire map is trying to reconcile their map types to the group level of NVC.
That was a different thing. That was for their EVTs. They were trying to map to the NVCS, and then potentially, they did, and then crosswalk it to the fuels models. But that's, it's just kind of a different thing. It's mapping the BPSs, which I was confused about a little bit earlier, thinking that, those ecological systems are also being used, but.
Okay, so yeah, I guess what is the map classes that you're using? Are those the biophysical settings? Are they the EVTs? Are they something akin to NVC?
So Landfire uses ecological systems to map 3 different vegetation concepts. One is existing vegetation type. And like Lisa said, we do have a crosswalk between Landfire's existing vegetation types based on the nature of each ecological systems to NVC. Okay, but then we also have 2 types of potential vegetation, one of which is biophysical settings. The other, I have to go back and see if we actually mapped it in Alaska. It's called environmental site potential. It's more like a climax veg concept. It doesn't include disturbance.
Okay.
I can't, but so there's no direct crosswalk between biophysical settings and the NVC, but because existing veg and biophysical settings both use nature serves ecological systems, you could use that EVT crosswalk, I think, to get a pretty good idea of how to link biophysical settings to NVC.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like maybe you could take the most prominent sterile stage or S-class.
Right.
Try to crosswalk that to NVC. I mean, NVC
I would even just start with
here. So
yeah, I would even just start with the name, because if EVT probably has an Arctic tundra that's like the same Arctic tundra that we would have in biophysical settings.
Mm-hmm.
You just crosswalk whatever EVT crosswalks to NVC. You could crosswalk the BPS the same way, at least as a starting point.
Okay.
But of course, just recognizing that you're sort of mixing and matching your concepts, because NVC is supposed to represent current veg, and the biophysical setting is going to represent a potential vegetation concept. Mm-hmm. But a lot of areas in Alaska, that's probably okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the Landfire map uses, I'm not sure I followed everything you just said, but Landfire map uses the
ecological systems.
Okay.
To map existing veg and biophysical settings.
Okay.
And there's a crosswalk from existing veg to NVC.
Thank you.
And if you dig into it and you have more questions, you can definitely reach back out.
All right, thanks.
I see that you have a question, you made a remark that's kind of hard sometimes to know what the definition of the types are. And there is a NatureServe Explorer, what it's called, online, and you can look up the definition of any of the ecological systems. It's a little hard to query sometimes, but it's out there, and I can help find those definitions if needed.
Yeah, and then there was that big document on the EVTs that one person did. Randall, I think? No. Yeah, no, I forget his name. Kind of cowboy looking guy. And some of the definitions for the EVTs from the ecological systems for the boreal ones at least include species that are more like Maine, you know.
Oh,
Northeast boreal things. So there is some differences with EVT and ecological systems, it seems.
Yeah, some of the types. Okay, yes, and some of those types are really broadly defined. It's a little confusing. Like a lot of the types that are defined for Alaska stretch into Canada. But we're, at least like for biophysical settings, we're focusing on, squarely on the Alaska part of the range. We don't need to cover the entire range if that goes beyond the state.
So just, I think this is pointing out an issue, right? So like, we don't have a real clear tie between ecological systems and BPS. It's hard to take one and relate it to the other. Unless you use S-Class or, the S-Class tool, then you can kind of get that. But I think it's not super clear, within the program about how all of these different classifications relate. And so I just want to, let's, you guys and the folks mapping it, let's think about that some more too, because it does seem like a problem. And honestly, I've had a hard time understanding it as well. So coming on as a, newer person.
Yeah. Yes. That's a good point. It is complicated. Don't be afraid to ask questions. All right.
So
go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, just a quick note. As you know, we did record this, and I will be saving the chat for sure. So I want to just thank you all for everything you put in the chat. That makes it really easy for us to track things down later.
You have a way to save the chat? I was worried about that.
Yeah. Yep. If there's 3 little dots at the very bottom of the chat to the right, if you hit that, there's a save chat option.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. I'm saving right now. Okay. Great. I don't see any more hands up. Okay. Well, thanks everyone so much for your time. If you have additional thoughts after today's discussion, you can contact me. And again, if you have time to open up one of the documents, put on track changes, and give us some feedback, that would be fantastic. I'll go ahead and stop recording.